Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something really interesting, kind of a paradox, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, how can text-based online communication, which seems so, well, lean, how can that actually create really deep, meaningful educational experiences?
Right. It does sound counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Challenges those initial ideas about needing face-to-face for real connection.
Exactly. So our deep dive today is all about figuring out the key things, the foundations that help higher order learning really happen in these text environments, specifically computer conferencing.
And we're leaning heavily on some great foundational research here. Folks like D. Randy Garrison, Terry Anderson, Walter Archer, and their colleagues, they've really dug into how to build effective virtual learning communities.
So our mission for you listening in is to unpack their big idea, the community of inquiry model. We want you to get a handle on the three crucial ingredients they identified for good online learning, see how they connect, and maybe discover some surprising upsides of text for, critical thinking.
Absolutely. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it. So the foundation is this community of inquiry model. What's the core idea?
Okay, so it's basically a conceptual framework. Think of it as a blueprint designed specifically to support a really effective educational experience when you're using computer-mediated communication, or CMC.
Right, CMC. And they don't just talk vaguely, do they? They pinpoint specific things.
Exactly. They identify three essential interconnected elements. These are absolutely vital for higher education, especially online: cognitive presence, social presence, and teaching presence.
Three pillars,
You
essentially.
think of it that way, yeah. When all three are there and they're managed well, you get this robust environment for learning, and that's becoming more and more critical as education shifts online, right?
Makes total sense. It gives you a way to think about quality online.
Precisely. A lens to assess and, importantly, to improve it.
Okay, so if we're building this environment, let's start with that first pillar. Cognitive presence. Sounds like the engine, maybe? The thinking part?
That's a good way to put it. Cognitive presence is defined as the extent to which the people in that learning community, the participants, can actually construct meaning through sustained communication, talking back and forth, but with purpose.
So it's directly tied to critical thinking, which is, like you said, a huge goal for higher ed.
Absolutely. It's about moving past just swapping facts or opinions. It's about collaboratively making sense of things, building understanding together.
Constructing meaning together sounds good, but I imagine it's tricky in practice. Did they give a kind of roadmap for how that happens? How does it start?
They did, yeah. They used what's called the practical inquiry model. It's based on John Dewey's ideas, actually. It's this multi-phase process, a cycle, really, of critical inquiry. It emphasizes moving between your own private thinking and sharing that thinking with the group.
Okay, a cycle. So where does it kick off? Phase one.
Phase one, the triggering event. This is where it all begins. An issue, maybe a problem, a dilemma is identified, something that makes you go, creates a sense of puzzlement, maybe some dissonance.
So it needs to grab your attention, make you think.
Exactly. And while the teacher often sets this up, posts a provocative question or problem, really any member of the group can introduce a triggering event.
So it's evocative, kind of inductive, like recognizing there is a problem or asking a question that shifts the discussion.
Precisely. That sense of puzzlement is key.
Okay, got the trigger. What's next? Phase two?
Phase two, exploration. So once you're puzzled, you start searching, looking for information, relevant knowledge, different angles, alternatives to help make sense of that initial trigger.
Right.
And this involves moving between thinking on your own and then sharing, socially brainstorming, asking questions, exchanging information. It's very inquisitive, divergent. You're trying to broaden the possibilities.
So lots of ideas flying around, information exchange, suggestions, maybe even some unsupported opinions at this stage.
Yeah, exactly. It's about getting stuff out there. But then you need to start making sense of it all, which leads
Right.
us to the next phase.
Okay, because exploration alone could just be noise.
All right, so phase three, integration. This is where the real construction starts. You're taking the ideas from the exploration phase and trying to build meaning, looking for connections, insights, trying to pull information together into coherent concepts or potential solutions.
This sounds like the harder part.
It often is, and it can be the trickiest to see just by reading the discussion transcript. You often have to infer that integration is happening. It's more tentative, convergent, bringing ideas together.
So I'm looking for people connecting ideas, maybe suggesting solutions, but acknowledging they're not final, building on what someone else said, forming hypotheses.
Exactly that, synthesizing. And then, ideally, you move to the final phase.
Phase four, resolution.
Right, this is where you try to resolve the problem or dilemma. maybe by applying a solution directly or vicariously, like through a thought experiment, testing a hypothesis, reaching some kind of consensus or conclusion.
So in a class setting, this might be more about testing ideas within the group discussion.
Often, yes. It involves things like applying the new ideas you've integrated, critically assessing the potential solutions, testing them logically, and defending them. It's more committed, deductive, trying to establish validity.
Okay, that's a clear progression. Trigger, explore, integrate, resolve. Sounds rigorous.
It is. And the really interesting thing is what some research found when looking at this in practice, in actual text-based CMC.
Oh yeah, what did they find?
Well, Newman and his colleagues, for instance, found something surprising. Students in these text-based computer conferences actually showed higher levels of critical thinking in some ways compared to face-to-face groups.
Higher. How so?
They were more likely to bring in outside material to support their points, and they were better at linking different ideas together to form solutions, even if overall they maybe posted fewer messages or seemed less interactive in a rapid-fire sense.
Wow, that is surprising. So the text format, maybe the time it allows for reflection, actually encouraged deeper, more convergent thinking.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. Less surface-level chat, perhaps, and more considered thought.
Interesting. But is there a catch?
Well, yes. When researchers actually coded transcripts for these 4 phases, they consistently found loads of exploration. Maybe around 42% of messages fell into that category.
Okay, so lots of idea generation.
Right, but much less integration, maybe only 13%, and even less resolution, sometimes down around 4%.
Ah. So getting people to those deeper levels of actually constructing meaning and resolving issues in text, that's the real challenge.
It absolutely is. It often requires very deliberate facilitation to push past just exploration.
That makes sense. And that idea of deeper thinking is fascinating, but it raises another question for me. If people are maybe reflecting more individually, does that mean they're less connected socially? You know, that feeling of online being cold or impersonal?
That's a perfect segue into the second pillar, social presence.
Okay.
Social presence is all about the ability of participants to project themselves socially and emotionally as, well, real people through whatever medium they're using.
Projecting your personality, basically.
Yeah, letting others feel you're there as a person, not just a username. Now, early theories, things like filtered cues theories.
Filtered cues.
Yeah, the idea was that text-based communication filters out all the nonverbal cues, facial expressions, tone of voice, body language. And because those cues are missing, the assumption was that communication would inevitably be lean, maybe terse, impersonal, task-focused, not great for social bonding.
So the early thinking was no face, no voice, no real connection.
Pretty much. That was the dominant idea for a while. But then a lot of research started showing something quite different.
Okay.
Numerous studies found that CMC can absolutely support rich, effective interpersonal interactions. People find ways to compensate for the lack of nonverbal cues.
How so? What did the studies find?
Well, for example, Angeli, Bonk, and Hara looked at online discussions and found about 27% of messages contained expressions of feeling, even jokes. McDonald saw online groups actually showing increases in openness and solidarity over time. Gunawardena found participants rated their online discussions as quite sociable.
So people adapt. They find ways to be social even in text.
Exactly. It really debunked that early lean media assumption. We're social creatures, we find ways.
Okay, so if social presence can happen in text, how do we see it? What are the signs, the indicators?
Garrison and the team break it down into 3 main categories of indicators. First, you have affective responses.
Effective. So emotions.
Yes, expressing emotion. This happens clearly through things like emoticons. They're a direct way to add emotional tone, but also through humor. Humor is huge. It reduces social distance, shows goodwill, helps build group cohesion.
Makes sense. Laughter connects people.
It really does. And the third part of effective responses is self-disclosure. Sharing a bit about yourself, your feelings, personal experiences, interests, that builds trust and helps people feel like they belong.
So a smiley face, a relevant joke, sharing a quick personal story.
These aren't just fluff. They're building blocks for connection.
Precisely. They signal you're a real person engaging with other real people.
Okay, that's effective responses. What's the second category?
Interactive responses. This is about showing open communication, that you're actually engaging with others, not just talking at them.
So interaction, how does that look in text?
It shows up when people use the reply feature specifically, or when they quote directly from someone else's message, also explicitly referring to what someone else posted, like building on what Sarah said.
Ah, okay. Showing you're reading and responding.
Exactly. And also things like expressing appreciation or agreement, complimenting someone's idea, or directly asking other participants questions. All these things build mutual awareness and recognition. They fuel that back and forth relationship.
Right. It makes the conversation feel like a dialogue, not just separate posts. Makes sense. And the third category.
The third is cohesive responses. These are things that explicitly build and reinforce the sense of the group as a unit.
Group cohesion. Like team spirit, almost.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
It manifests in simple things like using fatics and salutations. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Cheers. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Using vocatives, which just means addressing people by name.
So saying hi, Sarah, instead of just launching into your comment.
Exactly. And also, really importantly, addressing the group using we, our, or us. That language fosters a sense of shared identity and commitment.
That we're in this together feeling.
Precisely. These cohesive markers help sustain the group, build empathy, and critically, they stop the discussion from becoming just a series of disconnected monologues. You need that cohesion for the critical inquiry we talked about earlier.
So that human connection, that social presence, it's not just nice to have, it's actually crucial for the learning part, for the cognitive presence.
Absolutely. Critical thinking and deep discourse really thrive when students feel they're part of a supportive group, a real community. But there's a small caveat.
Oh.
Research suggests there might be an optimal level of social presence. You need enough to build trust and cohesion, but if the interaction becomes too social, too off-topic, it could potentially start to detract from the focused academic work. It's about finding that balance.
Right, you don't want the online equivalent of the class clown derailing everything, even if they're building social presence.
Exactly. It needs to support the learning goals, not overwhelm them.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Finding the sweet spot. So we've got cognitive presence, the thinking and meaning making. We've got social presence, the feeling of connection and community. What holds it all together and guides it? That must be the third pillar.
That's teaching presence. And it's absolutely crucial. It's defined as the design, facilitation, and direction of both the cognitive and the social processes, all aimed at achieving meaningful, educationally worthwhile outcomes.
Design, facilitation, direction. Sounds like the instructor's job.
Primarily, yes. The teacher usually holds the main responsibility. But an interesting point in the model is that these functions can be shared. Other participants can step up and fulfill some teaching presence roles too, like summarizing a point or asking a clarifying question.
So it's a set of functions not necessarily tied to one person.
Exactly. But ultimately, teaching presence is the binding element. It weaves cognitive and social presence together purposefully. And honestly, when online courses or discussions fail, you can often trace it back to a lack of effective teaching presence.
So if the discussion just meanders or doesn't get deep, maybe the teaching presence wasn't strong enough.
That's often the case, yeah. It ensures the interaction isn't just random chatter, but is actually coordinated towards the learning objectives.
Okay, so how does teaching presence break down? What are its components?
They identify three main categories here too. First, design and organization. This is all the upfront work, the planning.
Before the course even starts.
A lot of it, yes. Selecting content, organizing it logically, designing the learning activities like, will there be group debates, individual reflections, how will they be structured, and planning the assessments.
This sounds like even more work online than face-to-face.
It often is, because you have to be much more explicit. You don't have the established norms and routines of a physical classroom. You have to spell things out clearly.
So indicators here would be things like setting the curriculum, designing the methods, establishing time frames, thinking about how to best use the online platform itself, maybe setting rules for interaction etiquette.
All of that, yes. It's the architecture of the learning experience. And like you said, much of this is invisible in the actual discussion transcript because it happens beforehand. It's the essential scaffolding.
Got it. So that's the planning. What about when the course is running?
Then you move into facilitating discourse. This is the active guiding and shaping of the online conversation while it's happening.
Keeping things on track.
Exactly. And encouraging participation, pushing for deeper thinking. So indicators would be the teacher, or maybe a student, identifying areas where people agree or disagree, trying to help the group reach consensus, or at least a deeper understanding of different perspectives.
And encouraging people. Acknowledging contributions.
Definitely. Encouraging, acknowledging, reinforcing student contributions, that's key for building a positive climate where people feel safe to share ideas, especially tentative ones.
Mhm.
It's about steering the conversation productively.
Okay, makes sense. Design, facilitation.
Hmm.
What's the third part?
The third is direct instruction. This is where the teacher directly injects expertise, provides clarification, or gives feedback within the flow of the discussion.
So even in a student-centered discussion, the teacher still sometimes needs to just teach.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This can look like presenting specific content or posing very targeted questions. It might involve focusing the discussion if it starts to drift too far off topic. Summarizing key points to help consolidate learning is a big one.
And giving feedback. Diagnosing problems.
Yes. Confirming understanding, maybe through quick checks or direct feedback on posts. Diagnosing misconceptions is crucial. Sometimes it's about injecting knowledge from other sources, maybe bringing in a relevant article or sharing personal experience. And even practical things like responding to technical queries can fall under this.
It really sounds like the functions of teaching are the same as in a traditional classroom, but how you do them in text has to adapt.
That's the perfect way to summarize it. The role doesn't disappear, it changes form. You have to be more explicit, more deliberate perhaps, to compensate for the lack of immediate nonverbal feedback and presence. But the core need for design, facilitation, and instruction remains absolutely critical.
It's not less teaching, just different teaching, more intentional maybe.
Very much so. It requires a specific skill set adapted to the medium.
So we have these three presences: cognitive, social, teaching. They're clearly not separate silos. How do they all work together? What's the interplay?
They're deeply interdependent, absolutely. Think of it as a dynamic system. They need each other. You can't really have sustained cognitive presence, that deep inquiry, without a supportive social environment where people feel comfortable sharing and challenging ideas.
Right, the social presence enables the cognitive part.
Exactly. And neither the social nor the cognitive presence is likely to reach its full potential, especially those higher levels of integration and resolution, without effective teaching presence guiding the process, designing good tasks, and facilitating the discourse.
So teaching presence acts as the catalyst or the conductor for the other two.
That's a great analogy. It orchestrates the interaction to ensure it's both socially cohesive and cognitively productive towards the learning goals.
And coming back to that paradox we started with, the lean text medium, does this model suggest text actually has a hidden strength?
It really does. And it's something easily overlooked. The big advantage of text-based communication is the built-in time for reflection.
The asynchronous nature often.
Right. Or even just the pause needed to type versus speak. That pause allows for more considered thought. You can formulate your ideas more carefully, read others' points more thoroughly, maybe look something up before responding. This can actually make text potentially superior to real-time oral communication for achieving those higher-order cognitive learning goals, for really grappling with complex stuff.
So the slowness is a feature, not a bug, for deep thinking.
Potentially, yes. It forces a different kind of engagement.
That potential needs to be harnessed, right? It doesn't just happen automatically.
Absolutely not. And that brings us back to teaching presence. Skilled facilitation is key. You need that guiding hand to shape the online discourse, to push it towards systematic, sustained critical inquiry. Otherwise, that reflection time might just lead to disconnected thoughts, not shared knowledge construction.
So the potential is there in the medium, but teaching presence unlocks it.
Precisely. It moves the group beyond just exchanging information towards actually building understanding and solving problems together.
This model feels really solid, very practical. But are there still challenges, areas where it's still evolving or difficult to apply?
Oh, definitely. One big challenge is simply measuring these presences accurately, especially the more subjective indicators.
Like what?
Well, take humor, which we said is part of social presence. Studies trying to code transcripts for humor often find very low agreement between different researchers. What one person reads as a joke, another might miss entirely or interpret differently. It's hard to quantify reliably.
So the very human elements that make it rich also make it hard to measure consistently.
Ironically, yes. The same goes for inferring integration or resolution in cognitive presence sometimes. It requires interpretation.
So ongoing work is needed on the tools, the methods for assessing these things.
Absolutely. Refining assessment tools is crucial. Also, trying to figure out those optimal levels. We talk about how much social presence is just right, how much direct instruction versus facilitation. And of course, thinking about how new technologies, video, AI, virtual reality, might change or enhance or even challenge this model.
It's a dynamic field.
Very much so. And one last point the researchers often make is that this whole process, designing and facilitating effective online learning, actually forces instructors to become learners themselves. You have to constantly reflect on your practice, adapt your strategies, and evolve your understanding of what works in these virtual spaces.
That's a great insight. It's a learning journey for everyone involved.
It really is. It pushes pedagogical thinking forward.
So, wrapping this up, the community of inquiry model really gives us a powerful lens, doesn't it? A practical framework for thinking about how to create online learning that's not just convenient, but genuinely meaningful and effective. It flips that script on text being lean.
It absolutely does. It shows how to leverage the unique strengths of text for deeper, more reflective learning, provided you cultivate all three presences.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you, our listener, to take away. As you navigate your own online world, maybe for work, for learning, just connecting with people, start noticing these dynamics. Can you spot cognitive presence in a challenging work discussion? Social presence in a community forum, even teaching presence, perhaps, in how a meeting is run or a project is managed online? Think about how these ideas might apply beyond the classroom and maybe what new indicators you see emerging in our ever-evolving digital conversations. What signals effective communication and learning to you in those spaces?